Good morning. It is 6:37 a.m. on Friday, November 15th, 2019. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. Can you believe that it is already mid-November? What? Last night after work, I went to the gym like a good girl. And then also, I spent a big chunk of the rest of the evening watching the latest episode of Survivor, which was a 2-hour episode. And I mentioned yesterday that I was feeling a little frustrated just because I had heard some of the stuff that happens in this episode wasn't great to watch. And I'm not certainly not going to assume that those of you watching this video necessarily also watch Survivor. So the very, very short version is that one of the contestants was he's one of those guys who's kind of inappropriately handsy, right? And he's certainly one of those guys that doesn't mean anything by it. He's just friendly. And that's probably true, except that you still need to stop when asked, right? And it's not a matter of like, well, you said something 2 days ago, but then you didn't say something when I did it again the next day, so it's good now, right? That sort of thing. In any event, it became a thing in the show where one person was legitimately made uncomfortable by this. And then some of the other players decided to pretend that they were also uncomfortable with it for gameplay reasons. And then it turned into a whole nightmare of crap where 2/3 of the people left on the season did some pretty gross stuff. And, it's is disappointing just because, I really love Survivor. This season has been felt a little off regardless, like even before this. But, it was unpleasant to watch start to finish, and it's just really disappointing. Mike and I are still going to record our podcast about it, but we decided to push it back a couple of days recording just to let some of this steep sort of solidify how we feel about it. There's some interesting elements because on the one hand, both uh, being inappropriate, in terms of crossing people's boundaries and that sort of thing, is explicitly against the rules in Survivor, and the episode makes it clear with a extremely rare glimpse of the producers behind the camera actually talking to the one contestant to say, hey, we will intervene if it crosses the line. You let us know what you need to do. And then there's a title card later that says we met with all of the contestants and with this guy separately to give him an official warning and that sort of thing. So the point is that it's like, just like they're not allowed to physically harm each other, there are actually rules about some of that stuff. But the idea of like, oh, false accusations, well, on the one hand, in the real world, that's obviously awful and despicable. Obviously. But also in the real world, lying to and betraying people is pretty awful. But in Survivor, that's expected. Like, it's part of the gameplay, is that you're lying and backstabbing and betraying and everything. Like, yeah, the game is not all about that, but it's certainly present. And so the question then becomes, where is that line? And it strikes me I'm already at 5 minutes without having gotten to the main point. It strikes me as the precise reason why in game design it is important to think about things like consent and to have because on the one hand, in any game, like any tabletop role-playing game or things like that that can have lots of freedom for various elements to come into play, you could have an approach of just, oh, well, we'll handle any difficulty if it comes up. But if that's your approach, what you might end up with is a situation like this one where people have done something that is clearly despicable, but not technically against the rules. So, does that mean it's okay? It's like, and so that's all the more reason that, when you see some of these things go around like, oh, consent in gaming and how to build in mechanics and talk to your players and how to try to avoid those hot button topics and how to try to resolve them in a way that works for everybody when things like that come up. It's exactly for things like this. And this is a perfect illustration of how the Survivor producers, despite having this readiness to step in and do these warnings or whatever, still nonetheless allowed this situation to get kind of out of control in a way that has, I'm sure, made a lot of people upset. It's frustrating, and it does just sort of raise some interesting questions. And I only just watched it last night, so I haven't fully processed everything about it yet. But yeah, so it's disappointing that a show that I like has had this incident happen. I don't want to even say gone in a bad direction, because that implies a trend more than a specific unpleasant set of incidents. But I don't know. Yeah, it was disappointing, but it also does just strike home to me the importance of having explicit and stated rules about how to handle some of those things. And those rules are not necessarily defined in an abstract way, but by talking with your players about what should or shouldn't be on the table. And so probably, it's one of those things where, like, just like it's not allowed for one contestant to punch another in the face, maybe that means you should also be prohibited from lying about whether someone punched you in the face or not. Now, that is an example of something where, like, there could be video evidence of whether they did or did not punch you in the face on Survivor, right? But it's also a situation where, does that mean that for gameplay, like, we, the audience, might know they're lying, but the other players might not? And so they might end up getting someone voted out on that basis. And is that okay? It starts getting really messy, doesn't it? And then on top of that, there was also a disappointing number of the other contestants who were so quick to say, well, I never had a problem with his behavior, therefore it must be fine, right? Like, oh, sure, he touches people, but it never bothered me, therefore, ugh, gross. Anyway, that sucked. So, good opportunity to talk about some of this, these things in a broader context. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there, and I will talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes. Hope you have a good Friday.